Luo Xing had never been fond of mornings. The sound of the alarm clock ringing seemed to annoy him, but not nearly as much as his body's continuous betrayal. He lay in bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling, his fingers twitching in the soft, early light. They were growing again. Or maybe shrinking. It was hard to tell. Groaning, he sat up and tugged his arm out from under the tangled sheets. His fingers had turned into claws again, nothing sharp, just claws. The kind of thing you'd expect to see on a crab or a mangled action figure. He flexed them, the bones clicking like a clock winding down his body. A mystery wrapped in chaos. The only thing reliable about it was its unreliability. This strange, relentless ability of his to heal, to regenerate, was not a gift, it was a curse. Last week, his left leg had healed itself into a massive, muscular appendage, and he'd spent an entire evening in the city trying to avoid knocking over street vendors with it. That was, of course, after it had healed into a full-on crab claw for a few hours, forcing him to walk sideways like some kind of mutant beach creature. Today, it was his fingers again. The claws. He sighed deeply, glancing toward the small fridge in the corner of the room. Maybe a cold drink would help him think straight. If he could find the energy to get up. But as soon as he stood, something else happened. His stomach gave a weird lurch. Not a hunger pang, a deeper, stranger feeling. Luo Xing looked down, expecting to see a mess of crumpled tissues or maybe his spleen hanging out. Instead, his heart, his actual heart, was just sitting there. In the wrong place. That he stared at it in disbelief. His chest cavity had healed in such a way that the heart had ended up somewhere around his stomach. No, not quite his stomach, more like a twisted science experiment gone wrong. Luo Xing tried not to panic. Breathe. That was the first rule when your body became a living disaster area: don't panic. He reached into the drawer, pulled out a pocket knife, and held it over his chest. I can fix this. He muttered under his breath, a touch of false bravado sneaking into his voice that he couldn't fix it. Minutes later, he was sitting on the floor, heart back where it belonged, but only after some creative surgery. His method had involved an accidental puncture wound, a few deep breaths, and a lot of cursing. His fingers still looked like they'd been borrowed from a deep-sea crab, but now at least his internal organs were where they should be. He ran a hand through his messy hair, sighing in relief. The job was done for today. But something was gnawing at him, something beyond the pain of self-inflicted wounds. Luo Xing had heard the rumors about a place called the Healing Zone for years now, but they were always dismissed as just that, rumors. Whispers of a place where people like him, people whose healing abilities ran out of control, could go to fix things. To fix themselves. It seemed too good to be true. And if there was one thing Luo Xing had learned through his bizarre life, it was that nothing good ever came without consequences. No one just walked into a place of answers without finding themselves further tangled in the mess of life. But lately, things had gotten worse. Much worse. There were rumors about his own condition spreading beyond his control, and the question wasn't whether he would die anymore, but when. The letter arrived 3 days after the heart incident. A plain, white envelope slipped under his door. He'd opened it with a mix of suspicion and hope. Inside, there was a simple note, written in neat, precise handwriting: the healing zone awaits you. All you need to do is come. There is a place where your power is no longer a burden. A place of knowledge. A place of answers. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart. He'd read the note 5 times, wondering if it was a prank, some sick joke, or the real deal. But something about it felt real. And desperate. If he was being honest with himself, he didn't want to go, didn't want to take that leap. But Luo Xing was tired. Tired of waking up to another morning where his body had decided to betray him. He was desperate enough to give it a try. So, he packed a bag, nothing fancy, and set off the next morning, taking a bus that would lead him to the unknown. The first thing he noticed was the change in the air. There was something heavy about it, as if the entire atmosphere was pregnant with secrets. By the time he arrived, the buildings around him grew taller and more imposing. The streets narrowed, the sunlight seemed to wane as though it couldn't quite penetrate the air. At the end of the road stood an ancient-looking gate, covered in overgrown ivy and moss. The kind of place that looked abandoned, but not quite. Luo Xing hesitated, but only for a moment. Then, with a deep breath, he walked through. And immediately, something in his chest seemed to flutter. Inside the gates, there was no sign of civilization. No one. No noise. Just a long, stone pathway that stretched ahead, lit by dim, flickering lanterns. He walked alone, his footsteps echoing eerily in the stillness. Then, just as he was about to turn back, a figure appeared. She was tall, elegant, with a cold, calculating air about her. Her hair was long and silver, and her clothes were black, blending seamlessly into the shadows of the place. She looked like something out of a dream, or perhaps, a nightmare. "I am Professor Zhang," she said, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the silence. "Welcome to the healing zone, Luo Xing." Luo Xing blinked. "You know my name?" "Of course I do. I've been expecting you." He didn't say anything right away. There was something unsettling about the place, something off. But the only way forward was with her. He nodded. "Follow me." They walked through endless corridors of stone, each one leading to yet another room of unfathomable complexity. Every wall was adorned with symbols, some of which Luo Xing could only guess at. The deeper they went, the more alien the surroundings became. They stopped in front of an enormous, metallic door. Professor Zhang turned to face him. "In here lies your future, Luo Xing. But be warned, the path you are about to take is not for the faint of heart." Luo Xing nodded, unsure of what to expect. But he had come this far. Inside the room, there was a single table. On it, a strange device hummed with an eerie blue light. It looked like a machine from the future, a combination of technology and something ancient, as though it were out of place in both time and space. "This is the healing chamber," Professor Zhang said. "It is where your transformation begins." Luo Xing stepped closer, his curiosity overpowering his fear. He was tired of fighting his body. If this place could fix him, if it could give him answers, then he was willing to face whatever came next. She motioned for him to lie down. As soon as he did, the machine came to life, the hum intensifying. The room around him seemed to warp and bend, and for a moment, he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Was this the answer? Or was this just another trap? The last thing he saw before everything went dark was Professor Zhang's cold, emotionless face. Luo Xing's world faded to black, but he didn't feel the disorientation he expected. There was no painful sensation of losing his grip on reality, no gut-wrenching feeling of being thrust into another dimension. Instead, he felt weightless, as if floating in a thick, dark cloud, his body existing in a space where time didn't seem to matter. The hum of the machine surrounded him. His heart, his misplaced heart, still just where it shouldn't be, beat slowly, rhythmically. It was the only thing that felt real in this surreal place, a constant anchor as everything around him twisted and changed. And then, a voice, cold, methodical, whispered through the darkness. "Luo Xing." He opened his eyes. The room around him had dissolved, leaving only a vast, empty space filled with a strange luminescent glow. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. It looked like the inside of a giant machine, but it was organic, pulsing with life in a way that felt unsettling, as though it was alive and aware of his every movement. Luo Xing stood, feeling no different than before, though something in the air felt heavier, more oppressive. His fingers twitched again, but this time, they weren't just claws. The skin between the joints shimmered, shifting, as though something was changing beneath the surface. His other hand clenched, and for a moment, his entire body flared with heat. But before he could process it, the sensation vanished. He exhaled deeply, wondering if the room had somehow triggered something deeper within him. "Professor Zhang," he called out, the words echoing strangely in the emptiness. "What is this place?" A figure materialized before him, stepping out from the shadows of the strange light. It wasn't Zhang, though. The woman who appeared before him was taller, her face as serene as a statue, her eyes glowing with a faint blue light. "Do you know where you are, Luo Xing?" the figure asked, her voice an eerie whisper that slid under his skin. He took a step back, uneasy. "No. Should I?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, she extended a hand toward him, a gesture that seemed almost tender. As her fingers brushed against the air, the world around him began to shift. He felt as though something was peeling away from his consciousness, a layer of his mind being exposed to something far greater than he could comprehend. "Where are you taking me?" His voice was shaky now. The figure was too still, too calm, and it made his skin crawl. "What is this place?" "Don't be afraid," she murmured. "You are in the healing zone. But this is not where healing happens. This is where understanding begins." Luo Xing's pulse quickened. "Understanding what?" The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, she waved her hand, and the room around him exploded into vision, like fragments of broken glass reforming into a singular image. The walls of the strange, floating space dissolved, revealing a shifting tapestry of images. Some were of people, familiar faces, he thought. Others were of abstract shapes and symbols, pulsating in rhythm with the strange energy of the room. A vast, swirling mass of light and shadow hung overhead, and then, suddenly, he saw it. His own body, or something like it. It was twisted, its limbs elongating and shortening unnaturally, like a grotesque puppet being yanked in different directions. He watched, helpless, as his own form contorted, reshaped, and reformed in impossible ways. His heart moved from his chest to his side, his legs changed shape, his ribs crumpled and reformed. The figure was right, this was where understanding began, but what it had shown him was pure, terrifying chaos. "What is this?" he whispered. "Why are you showing me this?" "To help you see," she said. "To help you understand the true nature of your power. And to help you face the consequences of what you've become." Luo Xing staggered backward. "What do you mean?" The figure stepped closer, her expression softening. "You've asked for answers, Luo Xing. But the truth is not something easily grasped, nor is it something easily fixed." She gestured at the world around them, and suddenly the images stopped, solidifying into something more tangible. "You are not the only one who has been here. Many before you have come seeking a cure, seeking peace, only to discover that the path to understanding comes at a cost." He swallowed hard, his mind reeling. What cost? Immortality. The word hit him like a punch to the gut. Immortality? Yes. The figure's eyes glowed brighter now, the intensity in her voice growing. The healing zone was never meant to heal. It was always about perfecting what you are. Your ability to regenerate, to heal, is not a flaw, it is a gift. A gift that has been perverted by time and misuse. Those who came before you didn't just fix their ailments, they became something else. Something beyond the limits of human life. They became immortal. Luo Xing could hardly process what he was hearing. Immortality? It sounded like a dream, like the ultimate escape from his endless pain. But his mind rejected it just as quickly. You mean to say that everyone here, they just live forever? Not live, she replied with a hint of bitterness. Endlessly exist. Unchanging. Locked in a perpetual state of being. Trapped in a cycle of self-healing that does not allow death. Luo Xing felt the blood drain from his face. He staggered back a step. But, why? Why would anyone want that? To never die but never live either? Because the alternative is far worse. The figure's voice was calm, but her words were heavy. When your healing ability goes unchecked, it warps your body, twists your form. You become a prisoner of your own powers. But immortality Immortality is a choice. A choice. Luo Xing didn't know if he was supposed to feel comforted or terrified, but something about the figure's tone, her conviction, left him feeling more uncertain than ever. He didn't want to be a prisoner to his own body, and he certainly didn't want to live forever. But could he really just let go of his pain, of everything he had endured? Could he? The figure continued, you must choose. The healing zone cannot fix you without this choice. Without embracing the truth of what you are. The cost of healing is not what you expect. What will you choose, Luo Xing? Will you accept the gift of immortality, or will you reject it and continue your endless struggle? Luo Xing's heart pounded in his chest. The answer seemed so simple, yet so complicated. Could he really give up everything he had known, his body, his fears, his mortality? Was immortality really the answer? Or was it the ultimate curse? He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his own decision pressing down on him like a heavy stone. I need more time, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The figure nodded, her expression softening slightly. Time is something you no longer have the luxury of. But I will give you what you seek. The choice is yours, Luo Xing, choose wisely. And with that, the world around him began to fade once more. The images, the lights, the strange energy, all of it slipped away as if it had never been there at all. Luo Xing opened his eyes, finding himself back in the metallic room, the machine still humming softly in the background. His body felt different. Lighter, somehow. More aware. He looked around, but the figure, Professor Zhang, whoever she truly was gone. He was alone again. Alone with his decision, Luo Xing blinked rapidly, shaking his head as if to clear the fog of whatever strange dream, or vision, had just passed through his mind. He was lying on the cold, metal table again, the hum of the machine beneath him still resonating in the air. His heart beat in his chest, but something about it felt different. Slower. Like it was syncing with the pulse of the room around him. He sat up slowly, the room around him still sterile, blank, and unfathomably empty. The walls were no longer adorned with strange symbols or alien patterns. They were simply walls, smooth and unbroken, their surface cold to the touch. The machine that had once hummed with an otherworldly power was silent now. It felt like time itself had slowed to a crawl. He ran a hand through his hair, disoriented, trying to process everything he'd seen, everything he'd been shown. Immortality? What was he supposed to do with that? Could he even want such a thing? He had barely accepted the idea that he might need help, let alone that he might be forced to make a choice that would alter the very fabric of his existence. Luo Xing stood, his body a little stiff, but otherwise whole. His fingers were back to their usual, awkward state, no claws, no mutations. For a brief moment, he thought he might be free of whatever curse had plagued him for so long. Then, as his eyes caught sight of his reflection in the dark, polished surface of the wall, he saw it wasn't his face that made him freeze, but the faint glow of his skin. It was as if his body was absorbing the light in a way that wasn't entirely natural. He could feel it, too, something new inside him. The hum in the air was gone, but he could still hear its faint echo in the back of his mind. His heartbeat, slow and steady, felt synchronized with something far greater than him. He stepped forward, hands trembling slightly as he reached out to touch the smooth surface of the wall. A slight tremor ran through his body as his fingers brushed the cool metal. A faint whisper tickled his ears, words he could not understand. Then, suddenly, he was back in the same strange, glowing space. The figure stood before him again, as unyielding as before. This time, her eyes weren't glowing with a faint blue hue. Instead, they were pure black, empty voids. The same figure, but somehow, not. Something felt off about her presence. You have chosen, she said, her voice low and reverberating, like a distant echo across an endless void. You feel it, don't you? Luo Xing didn't answer right away. He couldn't. He felt it in his chest, a presence within him now that was undeniably powerful. It was as if the universe had lent him a piece of itself, an understanding he didn't fully grasp but that he could feel in his bones. The same power he had been cursed with, his healing, now seemed different. More controlled, yet more dangerous. "I don't know if I've chosen anything," he finally replied. His voice sounded strangely detached, as though the words weren't entirely his own. "I'm not sure I can choose. What am I supposed to do now?" The figure nodded, though her expression remained unreadable. "You have already made your choice, Luo Xing. By accepting this new path, you've accepted what was always yours to begin with." She extended her hand, and in an instant, the air around them seemed to twist. The world melted away, leaving only the figure and Luo Xing standing in a vast, infinite space. There were no walls, no barriers. Just darkness, stretching out endlessly in every direction. "This is the true form of the healing zone," she said, her voice calm yet heavy with significance. "This is not a place for simple healing. It is a place for the understanding of the essence of life. Your healing power is not random. It is not a curse. It is the key to something much greater than you could ever imagine." Luo Xing opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't understand what she meant. He hadn't chosen anything. He hadn't wanted this. All he had wanted was to stop the endless cycles of pain, to live without the constant dread of waking up to a new problem with his body. "You're lying," he spat, the anger rising in his chest. "All of this immortality, these games you're playing, they don't make sense. How can anyone want what you're offering?" The figure's expression softened. "You've seen what immortality can do. You've seen how it twists people into something they're not. But you've also seen the truth. The truth of what you are, and what you could become. The power to heal is not a mistake, Luo Xing. It is a force of nature. One that can shape the world." "I never wanted to shape the world," he growled, stepping back. "I wanted to fix myself." She paused, then spoke again, her voice gentle now, almost soothing. "And by fixing yourself, you will begin to understand that there is more at stake here than just you. This ability, your healing, goes beyond your own existence. It is connected to something far greater than you can see, a force that affects all living things. You are no longer just a man, Luo Xing. You are a vessel. A bridge between what is, and what could be." Luo Xing's mind reeled. He wanted to scream. Wanted to punch something, anything, to force this nightmare to end. But no words came. All he could do was stand there, staring at her, his hands trembling. "You must choose," she repeated, her voice still calm, but insistent. "To heal. To change. To become more than you are. The choice lies with you now. But remember, immortality is not a gift. It is a responsibility." Luo Xing clenched his fists, his nails digging into the palms of his hands as he struggled to keep himself together. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust that somehow, this was the answer he'd been seeking. But all he could think about was the darkness in her eyes, the coldness of her presence. There was no warmth in her words, no compassion. Only the weight of inevitability. "I don't want this," he whispered, almost pleading. "I don't want any of this." The figure didn't respond. She simply stared at him, her face unreadable. Then, she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself, "You will remain in this place, forever. A prisoner of your own powers, forever trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and fear. You have the power to choose. But if you refuse to make that choice, you will be left with nothing but the wreckage of your own existence." Luo Xing stood there in silence, the weight of her words sinking into him, deeper than he thought possible. He didn't know what to do. Didn't know if he could make this decision. But he couldn't remain here, couldn't let himself fall into this void of uncertainty forever. And then, as if an invisible force was pushing him, pulling him toward an unseen path, he took a step forward. "I don't want to be a prisoner," he said, his voice shaking with the sheer magnitude of what he was about to do. "I want to change. I want to be free." The figure's eyes flickered, and for the briefest moment, there was a softness in her gaze, an understanding that didn't exist before. She nodded, and the space around them began to shift again, the dark void beginning to crumble, like a cracked shell breaking apart. "You have made your choice," she said. "Now, you must live with it." The world around him shattered into a cascade of light and sound, the walls, the figures, the machines, everything, blurring together, and Luo Xing felt himself falling. Not falling into darkness, but into something else, something new. He didn't know what it was, but he knew one thing for certain: his life was no longer his own. Luo Xing felt the world crash down around him as the light exploded in every direction. He could barely keep his balance, his body swaying as the space he had known shattered into 1,000 pieces. The air felt different now, colder, heavier, as if something had shifted within him, something he couldn't quite understand. He had made the choice. He had taken the step into the unknown, and the weight of that decision pressed against him like a mountain. But as the chaos of the space around him began to settle, he realized something: the world was no longer dark. It wasn't entirely light either. There was an eerie, muted glow to everything, as if the room was bathed in the dim light of a distant moon. He couldn't tell if he was standing on solid ground or if the ground was even real. It felt like he was floating, but with a heavy anchor tied to his chest. The air was thick with the presence of something vast, something ancient, and then, he saw her again, the figure, the one who had guided him here. Her face was no longer cold, no longer distant. There was something like warmth in her gaze, something softer. For the first time, she looked almost human. "You've chosen," she said quietly, her voice still the same eerie calm, but there was an edge to it now, a sense of finality. "And now, you must learn what that means." Luo Xing swallowed hard, his throat dry. I don't know what this means. I don't know what I've done. What's happening to me?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped toward him, the light from her body casting strange shadows across the room, flickering like a flame caught in a breeze. "You're already changing," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You feel it, don't you?" Luo Xing nodded, though he wasn't sure what exactly he was feeling. The sensation in his chest had intensified since the light had swallowed him whole. It wasn't pain, not exactly, but something else, something new. He reached up to touch his skin, feeling the warmth pulse just beneath it. His body was no longer his own in the way he had always known it. His senses were heightened, the air too sharp, too clear. He could hear the smallest sounds, the fluttering of a distant leaf, the beat of his own heart, and it felt overwhelming. "You're becoming more than just a man," she continued, her voice low and patient, almost soothing. "Your body is healing, true healing this time, Luo Xing. Not just from the surface wounds, but from the core of your being." "How?" he asked, his voice strained. "How do you know what's happening to me?" Her eyes darkened, her expression unreadable. "I've seen this before. I've watched countless others go through this very transformation. But you're different. Your healing power was not given to you by chance. You were born with it. You have been shaped by it, molded by it. But now you must learn how to control it. How to wield it." Luo Xing felt his heart race again, a surge of panic flooding through him. He had lived his whole life in fear of his own body, afraid of what it might do next, of what parts of him would disappear or grow in the middle of the night. To hear that he was becoming something else, something more, sent a tremor through him. "I don't want this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to be more than what I was. I just wanted to be normal." She shook her head slowly, her expression pitying. "You were never meant to be normal. No one with this power ever is. You have the power to heal, to change the world itself. To fix it, even. But in return, you must become more than human. Your choice to accept immortality means you must accept the price of what you are becoming. Luo Xing stepped back, suddenly feeling like the walls were closing in on him. Immortality? He had heard her words before, but now that they hung in the air like an inescapable truth, they felt heavier than ever. But I don't want to change, he shouted, his voice cracking with the desperation he had never allowed himself to feel before. I don't want to be something unnatural. You already are, Luo Xing. Her voice was quiet, almost too soft for him to hear, but the weight of it was undeniable. You always have been. The moment you discovered your healing ability, you stepped into a world beyond your understanding. There is no going back from that. But there is a way forward. You can embrace this power, learn to control it, or it will consume you. Like it has consumed so many before you. He stood there, breathing heavily, feeling the rush of emotions inside him. His body had already betrayed him so many times, his heart, his limbs, his mind had all taken turns against him. How could he embrace something that had only ever caused him pain? How could he trust in this transformation, this new version of himself that was taking shape in ways he couldn't understand? But something in him shifted. Something about her words resonated deeper than the fear, deeper than the doubt. He wasn't sure if it was the knowledge that he had no choice left, or if it was something more. A part of him, something buried deep inside, had always known that he was never truly meant to be like everyone else. Show me, he said, his voice low, resigned. Show me how to control it. The figure stepped closer to him, her hands outstretched. Are you certain? She asked, her eyes searching his face. Once you accept this power, you can never undo it. You will never be the same. Luo Xing didn't hesitate this time. I'm ready. The moment he said the words, everything shifted again. The room seemed to dissolve into a swirl of light, and for a brief moment, he felt as though his very atoms were being rearranged. He felt his body stretching, contracting, expanding in ways that were both painful and exhilarating. His hands, his feet, everything seemed to pulse with a new energy, an energy that was all-consuming, and yet oddly familiar, like something that had always been inside him, waiting to be released. The figure stood in the center of the light, her face calm, watching him as he trembled with the force of this transformation. Feel it, she whispered. Feel the power coursing through your veins. Luo Xing closed his eyes, trying to center himself. It was overwhelming, this new sense of self that was unfolding inside him. But there was a strange piece to it as well, an understanding. It wasn't just about healing the body anymore, it was about healing the very fabric of existence. The pain, the disfigurement, the mistakes of his past, it all faded away, replaced by something else. A knowledge. A power. A connection to something far greater than him. He opened his eyes, the light around him dimming just enough for him to see clearly. His body was no longer just his own. It was something new, something infinite. And for the first time in his life, Luo Xing felt, he looked at the figure, a sense of calm settling over him. I understand now, he said quietly. This is the price, isn't it? She nodded, her expression unreadable. It is the price of immortality, yes. But with this power, you can shape the world. You can fix what is broken. Heal what is lost. But remember, this power is not without its dangers. It will test you. And if you fail, it will consume you entirely. I'm ready, he said again, his voice steady now, the fear no longer present. He had made his choice. And now, he would face the consequences. With that, the world around him began to solidify once more, the light fading to reveal the shape of a new reality, one where he could control the healing that had plagued him for so long. But as the room came into focus, Luo Xing understood that this was just the beginning. The world was vast, and now, with his newfound power, it was time to step into it, and he would never be the same again.